Thank you. Thank you, Ankita, for a kind introduction. Thank you, everyone, for staying. I feel the pressure of being the last speaker of the last session of the last day of the conference, but I promise I will be brief to make sure we don't miss the closing ceremony upstairs. So before starting my presentation, I have to note that the presentation is based on my research, which I presented on two different international conferences, the one at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and another at the George Washington University. And the paper is forthcoming in the next issue of the Israel Law Review later this year. But I will be happy also to present it before you and hear to your feedback. So the topic of today's presentation is the protection of animals in an armed conflict generally, and specifically in an ongoing armed conflict in the Ukraine. So because my previous background is international humanitarian law, so I kind of landed in animal law during my postdoc studies, I tried to kind of combine my international humanitarian law background to the animal law area, and this is what kind of came up out of this. So the presentation is really boring. This is the only picture you get here, so if you just bear with me, I will speak more or less the same with what the bullet point you will see on the screen. So every time I talk to people that my research is about the protection of animals in armed conflict, there are always the two main questions. So first is like, where are the animals in an armed conflict? Because the wars are fought between humans and armies, right? So where we have animals there. And then the second question comes, okay, even if there are animals, then is it like ethical to care about animals in wars? Because we have so many suffering from humans, like kids are dying, there's so many civilian people are dying, the combatants are dying. So, I mean, do we even have to care about animals? So I'll start answering this question from the second question because it's much easier, and the rest of the presentation is about answering the first question. So for the second question, the clear answer is that caring more about animals does not necessarily mean caring less about humans. So there is no ethical like a dilemma of balancing between like a human interest or animal interest, because those two can be kind of understood in a parallel way, meaning that we have to care about humans, of course, we have to care about animals as well. But unfortunately, the animal toll in wars are not counted at all. So that's the problem, of course. Maybe one of the reasons of the problem is that there is a gap in international humanitarian law, the gap about protecting animals, because international humanitarian law does not necessarily protect animals as such. And we will see it how. So this is the brief outline of the presentation. So I decided to speak first like generally about the use of animals in armed conflicts and like how they can become direct or indirect victims during an armed conflict, and then specifically focus on the conflict which is ongoing in Ukraine, and then like which international humanitarian law norms can be potentially applicable to the animal protection in armed conflict, and then like at least if time permits, focusing on three main patterns detected in the war in Ukraine, which is the protection of animals in the zoos, the protection of dolphin populations in the Black Sea, and the how the law can regulate the pet hunting to prevent starvation. So starting the use of animals in armed conflict, and answering the first question, where do we have animals? No, we do have animals in wars, and this is the history, so it's not happening like now only. It has been like happening all the time that animals were used as a transportation to transport humans, weapons, supplies, wherever. Animals were used as combatants to carry arms or as a weapons also to the weapons were attached to animals. They were used to deliver messages. They were used in military research and experimentation to test and develop new weapons. Animals were used to detect the explosives. Animals were also used for companionship to raise morale in the army, etc. So, and this list is non-exhaustive. So, in all these situations, of course, all of these are permitted by international humanitarian law. But when I'm saying permitted, it means that it's not prohibited, because if you go through the core instruments of international humanitarian law, you will never find the name, like the term animal at all. So we don't have like a kind of regulation of use of animals in wars at all, which allowed the parties to the conflict to actually use those use non-human animals for different purposes. But even though this can be allowed by law or not prohibited by law, I still call it as abuse and not use. Because, and even if some of these uses might not be very dangerous for animals, but still, the animals never made decisions to be involved in the war. Those decisions were made by humans, mostly by the parties to the conflict, and that's why I call all kinds of uses of animals in the war as an abuse of animals in the war. So this was the use, but now we see, let's see how animals can become indirect victims of an armed conflict. Again, answering the first question, where do we have animals? No, we have them there. So sometimes the destruction of natural environment or biodiversity spots actually disturbs the wildlife fauna. The mass displacement of people, which is, for example, in Ukraine is happening now, actually leads the owners to leave their companion animals behind because simply either there is no enough space or there is no enough resource to carry them and abandoned. In some instances, for example, during the Second World War, the fear of famine and starvation led the governments to instruct the owners to kill their pets. And in UK, for example, like an overnight, like more than 500,000 pets were killed by their owners because there was the warning. The warning was issued by the government. Intensive urban warfare in the cities also caused a danger and threat to the animals in zoos or in shelters in the cities. The wildlife trafficking in some parts of the world, which is used to finance more wars, actually endanger certain species of animals. Also, the use of starvation as a method of warfare sometimes led to the people to hunt down the pets or the stray animals simply to survive. This phenomenon was detected back in the Second World War, and the latest example comes also from Ukraine. There are multiple reports indicating that the people in the besieged city of Mariupol resorted to this practice simply to survive. And again, this list is also non-exhaustive, so we have an effect, indirect effect of the hostilities on animals in the multiple occasions. Now going back to Ukraine, so maybe the small methodological point that because the conflict is still ongoing, that not so much information is available. So there might be more and more information or data coming up how the animals suffered during the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But here are just a few, just to mention a few of them. The latest one, probably you all seen, the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam caused the flooding. Lots of wildlife animals were killed. Lots of companion animals were killed. The zoos were destroyed, and there's some ecological catastrophes on the way, which to some of the commentators already are referring as an ecocide. There were like at least 2 cities where the zoos were targeted in Kiev and Kharkiv, leaving the animals in the zoos either killed or escaped and not accounted for. The blockade of roads in certain areas caused the cut off the supplying of food to animals in shelters or in farms, which caused either like a starvation of the animals or killing of them. Also, like a bombing around certain farms caused the farm setting on fire and killed animals killed. The dogs were used as a trophy. Some other dogs were used for mine sniffing. As I mentioned, in the besieged city of Mariupol, people also like referred to they resorted to the practice of pet hunting to survive, and there was also a rapid decline of Black Sea dolphin population since February till September. That's the data I have, at least, which is available, because it might be still ongoing. But since the February till September, there were at least 5,000 dolphins killed and floated on the shore of Ukraine. And this is like a really huge, like an increase in the death toll of the dolphins in this area. Question here: does the international humanitarian law protect animals in wars? Simple answer is no, because as I said, if you go through the core IHL instruments, you will not find the term animal at all, which means that animals as such are not protected in international humanitarian law, but we still have some provisions under IHL which can potentially be applicable to animals, depending how we perceive animals under the law. So if we see animals as a property, then we have the provisions in the IHL which protects private or public property from a destruction. If we see animals as a civilian object, then of course we have a provisions in the IHL which protects civilian objects. However, this is found in the additional protocol 1 to the Geneva Convention, but the commentaries to the protocol clearly indicates that the civilian objects are the ones which are inanimate objects. So there is a bit problematic to qualifying animals as a civilian object because we know that animals are not inanimate, right? They move, they can move, they have motions, etc. The wildlife animals can also be seen as a part of natural environment, and we do have provisions in IHL which protects natural environment, and I'm going to speak about it into more details later. Animals can also be seen as a combatants. There are like a few authors which suggest this view, especially when they carry arms or when they are used for military campaigns, like exploding some weapons, etc. But the problem here is again that the protection granted to combatants comes together with the obligations of the combatants, and since the animals don't have the capacity to have these obligations, it will be a bit challenging to qualify them as a combatants under the IHL. Animals can also be protected under the provision which protects objects indispensable for human survival. This is a bit of a paradox because so the law protects objects indispensable for human survival, which means that we are protecting animals simply for them to be slaughtered afterwards and used as a means for human survival later. And also, animals can be protected under the freedom of religious provisions in IHL, which obliges the parties to the conflict, if they keep the prisoners of war, to make sure that the prisoners of war observe their religious practices, because in some of the religions, the animals are considered as a sacred beings. But again, there is no provision which is clear. I mean, which is specifically protects animals in an armed conflict. Now moving to these three patterns in the war in Ukraine, which I mentioned. The first is the zoos. So as I mentioned, there were at least two cities which were where the zoos were targeted by Russian forces. There was in Kiev and in Kharkiv. The zoos as such, including its territory like premises, infrastructure, qualifies as a civilian object under international humanitarian law unless it is used for military purposes. There was no any evidence suggesting the zoos in Kiev or Kharkiv were used for military purpose. Therefore, we assume the zoos were civilian objects and the attacks against the zoos were prohibited. However, the individual animals who are kept in the zoos, they do not qualify as civilian persons because the civilian persons are specifically, like the international humanitarian law specifically underlines, those are these human persons. So there is no non-human persons who can be protected under this clause. And including the species of wildlife fauna who can be kept in the zoos, they cannot be also protected under the environmental protection clause because they are taken out from their natural habitat. But if the zoos are running some nature conservation programs, the species which are involved in this program are intended to be introduced later in the natural environment. Those zoos can actually benefit from the protection given to the natural environment because they keep the species in the conservation program which are intended to be introduced in the natural environments. So this was about the zoos in a brief. So with regard to Black Sea dolphins, as I mentioned, there were I believe three scientific reports out by Turkish and by Romanian, I believe, and Ukrainian scientists, which detected the rapid increase of the deaths in the dolphin population, and the cause cause of this of their death was considered the I would say like the Russian warships, which just merely navigate in the Black Sea area. They intercept the sonar signals between dolphins, and the dolphins usually communicate with the sonar signals. So this causes their disorientation. They get anxiety, and they simply don't know what to do. So they kind of end up being drowned in the shores and being killed. This caused a lot of debate whether this is the crime against the environment, whether this is an ecocide, whether this should be prosecuted under international humanitarian law, under international criminal law, or under Ukrainian national law. The question here, or the debate actually, was that because the death of the dolphins does not necessarily affect the humans, right? So we have like 5,000 dolphins, at least 5,000 dolphins killed, but it did not cause any suffering to humans. So that's why even in the environmental kind of crimes, alleged environmental crimes, these crime against dolphins are not prioritized. Unlike for example, the Kakhovka Dam, because this caused a lot of suffering to humans as well. So now this raises the question whether international humanitarian law is an anthropocentric, like fully anthropocentric, or it protects the environment even without a link to human survival. Because even the title of this area is like humanitarian law, so it's like humans are in the center of this law. But at least there is one provision in the IHL which refers to the natural environment and the protection of the health and survival of population. And the commentaries to this provision indicate that the initial draft of this text was the health and survival of the human population, but then the drafters erased the human, which actually suggests that the intention of the drafters was to protect the environment as such, not because it is linked to the human survival or to human, health, but just merely as a natural environment. So this actually opens up opportunity to qualify the attacks against, not attack, but like the crimes against dolphins, 3 minutes, okay, as a potential crime against the environment prohibited under IHL. But then we have a really high threshold in the international humanitarian law, like what kind of attacks against the environment is prohibited. So the IHL says that the only attacks or use of means and methods of warfare which causes widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the environment is prohibited. So if we don't have this three-part test met, then the acts against the environment would not be qualified as a crime against the environment, which opens up opportunity for prosecution of this crime under some other, let's say, like areas of law, which is either international criminal law or the domestic jurisdiction of Ukraine. But when we go to international criminal law, we have a Rome Statute, which is the founding treaty of the International Criminal Court, and the prosecutor of the ICC already launched the investigation in the situation in Ukraine. But when we go to the Rome Statute, we have a war crimes article number 8, which even sets a higher threshold for the environmental crime, which means that there should be an attack launched against the environment, and then there should be this three-part test met, and then this attack should be disproportionate to the military advantage gained. So this is a bit problematic again, right? But we have and so far we don't have an international crime of ecocide, so we cannot prosecute this under international law as an ecocide. But we do have Ukraine does have the crime of ecocide in its domestic criminal code, which actually does not have that high threshold. It actually says that the mass destruction of flora or fauna, and then the commentary further clarifies that this includes like either full destruction of certain species or partial destruction, which disrupts the functioning of the species in a certain area. So this kind of allows the possibility, this is like my main argument, that the domestic prosecution of the crimes against dolphin is the most feasible option under the existing law, because the international humanitarian or criminal law sets very high thresholds for prosecuting these crimes. And I believe I'm out of time, or I have like 30 minutes. Okay, I'll skip this. Maybe very briefly, like the eating pets and birds. It's like the main idea is that the people who resort to this practice of eating the birds or pets should not be prosecuted for this, because this was caused by the armies who used the starvation as a method of warfare, because the international humanitarian law actually prohibits use of starvation as a method of warfare. So my suggestion is that if the armies or generals who use the starvation as a method of warfare will be prosecuted for this, they should also be prosecuted for the crimes against animals together with the starvation, because this kind of caused the chain of the other reactions, which is this, because people simply did not have any other choice just to resort to this practice simply to survive. Okay, I skipped that one, and that was it. I think I was on time. Thank you. I hope it was not boring. I will be happy to hear your questions, thoughts, or comments.